Okay, I think we can slowly start with this webinar today while people are still joining. Welcome to another webinar organized by CMCC. In this case, it's a webinar jointly organized by two projects, European Commission projects, Capable and ECMF. And we're very happy to have a collaborator on actually both of these projects here, who is Robert Pietzcker from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, who is a senior scientist there and has a lot of experience in climate and transition modeling. And we're happy to get the invitation to give a talk today on a paper that it has actually just been published. So I think that's very, very timely on a topic that's very relevant, which is on the credibility and the ETS system in particular, or carbon prices in general, and looking at the role of commitment as a key factor on the effectiveness and long-term viability of emission trading, which is one of the big pillars, of course, of European climate policies. Just a few seconds on the two projects that are related to these works. So the first is Capable, which stands for Climate Policy, Acceptability and Economic Framework, which has is a project more on political feasibility and acceptability of climate policies, because as it turned out, it's not only that the technical roles, the economics, the pricing mechanisms, but also the public acceptance and climate policy precisely around these topics. Maybe one key highlight here is that we are currently actually this, as we speak, implementing a large-scale surveys on public opinion on climate policies in 12 European countries that you can see here, with a large wave of participants, and we will do this again to get some insights on also the role of climate policies for the European election in particular. So he focuses on this social and political dimension. The second project is the so-called ECMF project, which is more on the modeling side. It's the European Climate and Energy Modeling Forum, which kind of aims to develop a coherent, let's say, scientific knowledge base for the assessment of European climate policies. And here we use co-development to develop research questions, talk to a lot of international initiatives on the modeling side, like the IPC, the Integrated Assessment Modeling Consortium, but also the EMF. And we also try to develop common data formats, data or and tools to harmonize this assessment of climate policies. And this is also part of these works. And yeah, so these two projects are, let's say, related to these works. Few housekeeping rules. Audio and video is deactivated by default, but you can raise the hand throughout the talk, but better also than after the talk, which will be roughly not more than half an hour. You can raise your hand or also type your question in the Q&A section, and then I will pass the question to the speaker. In case you raise your hand, you can also give you the floor, so you can ask interactively via the audio feature to Robert. And yes, the video, just a reminder, this will be also recorded and uploaded on the YouTube channel of CMCC that you can see here. And yeah, with that being said, I'm happy that also Johannes Sitarz is here, also from the Potsdam Institute, who is actually, I think, the first author of that paper. So I'm hopeful she can also address any questions. And yeah, without further ado, thanks a lot for attending, and yeah, Robert, the floor is yours, and then Johannes, when you want to share the presentation. Thanks a lot, and talk after the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Johannes. Thanks a lot for this very kind invitation and for this opportunity to speak here. I hope the sharing of the slides works, and you should all see the header now. Perfect. So welcome to all of you. Great that you made it. I'm going to present insights from a recent study that we published in Nature Energy, and the first author, Johannes Sitarz, is here as well to answer all of your questions later. And the topic that I'm going to talk about is credibility makes or breaks the price, political commitment in long-term climate policy, key for effective EU emissions trading system. So this contains the main things I want to speak about today, the EU ETS, and how political commitment or and this is in combination with foresight, influences the price in this emission market. This is the output of a number of projects that work together. So we have on the German side the Ariadne project, and from the EU Commission we have the European Climate Energy Modeling Forum and the Capable, which both host this webinar together. Now, without further ado, let me start by saying that this work was really kicked off by a question that arose when tracking ETS prices over the years. I mean, the ETS has been around since 2008, and there were a number of ups and downs in the last year. But if you look at the prices over the last, sorry, this should go forward. Over the last year, there's a very clear question: why did carbon prices in the EU ETS surge tenfold over the last 5 years? So this shows actual EUA prices, secondary market, since roughly 2008. It had an initial start around 25 euros, then it quickly went down to roughly 15, dropped further, and then for the last, for roughly 2012 to 2018, stayed around 10 euros, sometimes going down as far as 5 or up to 12 or 13, but really staying very low. And then you had one plateau that was, then you had strong increase, reaching a plateau for roughly 2 years around 25 euros, and then another strong increase. And now, since 2 years, roughly an area of 65 to 95 euros per ton of CO2. And I mean, that's an impressive price evolution over the years. And clearly anybody working in this market or thinking about legislation for climate policy is thinking about why did the price change so much and what is driving these and what do we know about the future. This is the one aspect that brought us to this research that I'm going to present here. The other is really looking at the ETS itself and thinking about how market actors see the world. And clearly ETS regulated firms live in a highly uncertain world. You have on the one side, like if you're a utility and you own a gas power plant, you're planning for the future, where should you invest? You have lots of uncertainties within your sector. So within the power sector, it's a question, how does the electricity demand develop? What's the future prices for coal and gas? What's the development of technology costs, PV, wind, batteries? How do grids evolve, and so on? So lots of open questions. But if you're a utility, you're used to this because you've been dealing with these questions for decades. However, in the ETS, you have on the one side power sector, but also industry and aviation. So you get additional open questions. For example, what's the development of hydrogen technologies, CCS technologies, very relevant in the industry sector and partially in aviation? What's the economic growth? Is there deindustrialization or so on? So lots of additional uncertainties. And finally, on top of all this is a huge regulation question. Will this policy, the EU ETS, still be there in 20 years? And in what form? What are the caps? So if this market would somehow crumble, clearly your certificates become worthless and you shouldn't look too far into the future. Now, all of this may make firms and market actors act myopically and only care about the very short term. But how strong is this effect and is it really there? This was something we set out to try to address. Now, if you look at energy models and real decision making, usually many of the energy system models, all of these linear type models, usually have perfect foresight. So they take a certain horizon, 2020 to 2050, for example, and then look what are the policies implemented, what are the prices that are going to come up, and then do an optimization of investment decisions and dispatch decisions. Now that's very nice, but it clearly is not really how the world looks like, because sorry, this myopic thing shouldn't have come up already. If you're in this perfect world, you end up with a dynamic cost effectiveness transformation. So you do the right thing at the right time. Even if it's something may be uneconomic, if you only look at the market today, it may be economic to invest in something because 5 years later it will pay off. And if you have this perfect foresight, then you will take all of these future benefits into account and make the least cost decision and investment in this optimal way. But clearly the real world is different. You have market actors only seeing a certain period of time, knowing the prices right now and maybe the next 5 years, and then making some guesses about the future, but it's unclear how much of this future do they take into account. So whenever whenever they make the decision, they have incomplete information. So real decisions taken under myopia. And now the question is, what happens if we used myopic models to analyze policies and to design more robust policies? We're clearly not the first ones to ask this question. So there have been publications, papers using myopic model to assess policy instruments here. Just a few examples. So Fusionarini did a study where they looked at a capacity expansion model showing that if you have a myopic model, then clearly you will have delayed climate action and higher total transformation costs. And there are also some other studies that use myopic models for computational reasons. But to our knowledge, there was no study really using a combination of both a myopic model and a perfect foresight model to analyze concrete policy instrument, not just generally how do we achieve climate mitigation, but look at a real world policy instrument and try to deduce some insights about the market actors and how the market works. Now, the EUTS, I will give a very brief intro about the basics of the EUTS and why it is a market where foresight is especially important and relevant. So the EUTS, I mean, it covers roughly 40% of the EU's greenhouse gas emissions. It covers several sectors. I said electricity already, the centralized heat sector. It has industries like large-scale industry and aviation, and will soon also have maritime in. So it covers a number of different types of emission sources. And the EUTS is uniquely positioned to analyze the effect of myopia because it contains banking of certificates. That means it's possible if you have it, like you bought a certificate from the commission or from the institution that sells these and that auctions these certificates, and then you can either use them and emit a certain amount of CO2, or you can put them aside and use them in the future when you expect that in the future certificates are more scarce and thus give you a higher price. But this only, well, this putting things aside, banking certificates will only happen if firms are farsighted and anticipate that in the future certificates will be scarcer. Now, we have this general characteristic of the EUTS, why foresight matters. And now, secondly, we have two very large reforms, which are here marked by these black lines. Can you see my pointer? Yeah, I hope, right. So we had large EU ETS and MSR reform in 2018, and then we had around 2021 the Fit for 55 package, which implied strong change of EU ETS parameters. And so what we have is this perfect natural experiment that there were, or not totally a natural experiment because there's actually policy changes involved, but we have this experiment where in the real world rules were changed and prices changed, and we can compare it to modeling results and see what we can draw from this comparison. Now, that was a rough introduction. Let me briefly speak to you about the methodology, how we went about to approach this question. So what we're using is the long-term investment model for the electricity sector of Europe, LIMES EU, that has been used in a number of publications, covers the EU ETS countries, so the EU, Norway, Switzerland, and also has UK and Balkan in, covers all of the EU ETS sectors in varying degrees of detail. So the electricity sector is relatively well detailed with detailed investment and dispatch. And then we have the industry and heating sector and aviation with very rough marginal abatement cost curves. Now, usually this model, or in the past, this model was always a perfect foresight model. So you had the full time horizon, 2010 to 2070, you put in a climate policy, and then the model came up with the least cost solution, looking at all the timestamps at the same time. Now, Johannes developed a myopic version of this model, where the model, like this is the whole time frame again, but it starts out and takes, for example, 10-year time steps and only optimizes these 10-year time steps. So in this example, it would optimize the 2015 and 2020 time step, get a least cost result for this time step, and then move forward for 5 years, save all the relevant variables that cannot be changed. So if you invested something in 2015, then this new information about the standing capacities in 2020 will be saved for the next time step, and then you will optimize 2020 and 2025 and go in the same way through all the time steps until you have covered the whole time horizon in these 10-year intervals. Now, let's come to the results, and we split them into parts. First of all, like conceptually, what does myopia imply for the EU ETS? And then more concretely, what can we say about the current state of the EU ETS? On a general level, what are the implications for ETS? I'll show you some results. These are in a simple version of the model where we don't have the market stability reserve, so the MSR in place, because this can further complicate the results. So this is a simple model. You just have an EU ETS cap over the time and see what the model comes up with cost-efficient solution. Now, if you look at the budget that is contained in the ETS, so the sum over the caps for such a 10-year time horizon from here, for example, 2023 to 2032. You see here on the left side, this is the sum of the caps. So this bar here is the sum of the 2023 to 2027 cap that is given out by the EU Commission. This slightly smaller bar here is what's given out from 2028 to 2032. And then we have this large dark bar down here. Sorry, that I somehow can't see anymore. That's the TNAC, so the total number of allowances in circulation, what has been stored, banked from the past. And now if we run the model in perfect foresight, these are the emissions that come out of the model. And you can see the model emits less than it would be allowed to emit in this time frame. So it could emit all the way up here because those are the total number of allowances that could be surrendered to the EU Commission. Maybe it works better. This doesn't disappear as much, but the model decides to put some further certificates to the side and not emit all of this. If we go to the myopic version, you can see it only looks out to the end of the time frame, 2030, and spends all the certificates, which would be the right thing to do if you expect the ETS to stop in 2032. Then you would really try to get rid of all of your certificates, have much higher emissions. So we can already see myopic firms emit as much as possible and don't anticipate the future scarcity. Now, what does this imply for the next time step? So jumping 10 years ahead, in the perfect foresight world, you take this difference as your TNAC for the new time step. And so you have this large amount of certificates that you took from the last period, and then you get some new ones. In 2035, there's more given out. 2040, there's more given out. These are not the exact numbers. This is just to represent. If I would show the exact numbers, the 2040 would be so small I can't put a number in there. So don't take the exact height of the bars as real. And sorry, I was briefly irritated. And then you can see, okay, emissions. The model is still putting away, not emitting all this, but still putting away some certificates for the next 10 years because it knows after 2040 things are going to be even harder because there will be no new allowances at all given out. You still have potentially some aviation or maritime emissions or maybe some really hard to abate industry sectors that want to emit. So you better put away the certificates. So please don't emit all. In contrast, in the myopic version, there is no TNAC because the model never started saving emissions for the future, certificates for the future. So then it only sees the newly given out certificates and therefore has to reduce emissions much more strongly. And the time step afterwards will be really painful because again, you don't have any TNAC and then there will be no emissions left. So you really have to be gross zero in, or like within the ETS zero in 2045. If you look at this over time, you see for the foresight model here, this evolution of cumulative emissions, so total emissions summed over the time. And now in the myopic foresight version, it emits much more earlier and then sees, oh, this is getting really tight, and then has to reduce emissions much more strongly. And here, the curve, like the slope of this graph is how much can be emitted in a year. Here we still have a positive slope. So here we can still emit something, while here we are already at perfectly horizontal. So there are no emissions left in 2050. This is the general behavior of the emissions. Now looking briefly at CO2 prices, clearly If in the beginning you emit more and you don't try to reduce as much, you have a much lower CO2 price that emerges in the market. But then the perfect foresight, in the perfect foresight, you have just an increase by the discount rate, 5% in the model. So you always have the decision, do I use it now or put it away for later use? And then if everybody has perfect information, you just get a perfect increase by the discount factor hoteling rule. And now in the myopic case, in the beginning, you have much lower prices. And then in the end, because you have to reduce much faster, then prices go up much higher. Now, this is the general insights that came out of the comparison of the two versions of our model. Looking at the concrete reforms, we can start trying to answer the question if EU ETS market actors really behave myopically. Now, I would say a bit with this plot, so I'll try to explain a bit more. You see here the last decade, and up here carbon prices, and blue is the real world ETS prices that were seen in the market. And then we have model results, again, trying to use the same color code. So whenever we use the myopic model, we put it in yellow. Whenever we use the perfect foresight model, we use this greenish color here. And if we look at the time here, 2013, 2018, and put in the caps as they were, the linear reduction factor and all the effects that were there into the model, and then run it, we see myopic foresight model comes out with something like 2 or 3 euros per ton of CO2. The perfect foresight comes up with something around 15 euros per ton of CO2. And in the real world, we are around 10, often going down to 5 or so. And so we conclude that before this first reform in 2018, firms were rather myopic. The blue line is an average closer to the yellow dots than to the green dots. Not fully myopic, clearly, but closer to this. Then we had the ETS reform in 2018, MSR and ETS reform. And then we see if we start our model and just put in the slightly tightened caps and the slightly changed rules of the MSR, the model doesn't really see a lot of difference in results if market actors are myopic. So the reform, just looking at the rules, didn't change much about how the short-term outlook for emissions would be for certificate scarcity. However, in the perfect foresight model, we do see a bit of change, still not large, but a bit larger change. And if we look at the real world, we see, okay, the price rose a lot more than we would expect from our myopic model and is relatively close to our perfect foresight model results. And so our interpretation is that if our modeling is not wrong, then after the 2018 firms became much more farsighted than they were before. And now we were discussing what could be the case. Why is that the case? And our interpretation was that these reforms were really hard. They negotiated for more than a year and went back and forth, and it was really with the council saying yes, saying no, putting new offers on the table, and so on. It was really a challenging process and a lot of political capital that needed to be invested to get this through. And when it got through, it was a sign, okay, this is actually important enough for policymakers to get this through, to make this still a very important policy instrument. And so we infer that the sizable political capital invested into the reform strengthened the credibility so that the ETS would be around still 10, 15, 20 years later, and thereby induced actors to account for future scarcities and adjustingly put more certificates aside. And now if we take a look at the last reform, so in 2020, there was the EU climate law, the EU Green Deal that was adopted. And then in the Fit for 55 package, very clear rules on very clear proposals on how the linear reduction factor should be tightened came up. We see in the real world, the market reacted with a very strong price increase, and also in our model, the new caps lead to very high CO2 prices compared to what was observed the 15 years before that. So we see with the new adjustments, with a Fit for 55 adjustment of the cap, our models gives us for our default assumptions roughly 80 euros per ton of CO2 for the 2022-2023 time with perfect foresight assumptions. But as you see down here, the yellow line, it also went up from the reform, but again, much less. For a myopic agent, the tightening of the cap still wouldn't lead to the prices we observe today. And so we interpret this by saying this foresight effect on the price is here currently around 50 euros per ton of CO2, which is really sizable. What does this do to the energy system? I mean, we have the ETS market, and the main reason why we have it is we want to drive the transformation to a climate neutral energy system. And here are just two exemplary pieces. If you look at renewables expansion, here you have the wind onshore capacity in our 2 runs, and you clearly see if you are in a myopic world, the yellow line, then you have much delayed renewable expansion in the next years. And this again leads to much higher emissions. So here we plot the coal exit, how much terawatt hours are produced. Sorry, something went wrong with the numbers there. This shouldn't be 5,000. Sorry, I'll check what what went wrong when I copied there. We have a delayed coal exit, so much higher coal electricity generation in the myopic scenario than in the perfect foresight scenario. Taking one step away, we also thought about the conceptual framework around this and what it means for the future. So this is a simple sketch that we came up to try to describe the mechanics behind this. So starting out in the past with these low carbon prices in the ETS, we see that through something like the MSR reform, policy credibility was increased. Before, with so many years of low prices, could be understandable that market actors said, this will never be really a tight market. We don't really believe this will be a main driver. So we don't expect it to be the big thing in 2030 anymore. And now with the reform, this credibility was strengthened. Actors extended their foresight, carbon price increased, and this could actually turn into a vicious cycle because the more price increased, the more people were aware of this ETS and really saw it as an important pillar of mitigation. And you also had more analysts and strategists looking at these ETS prices and thinking about the future and compiling information and providing information to the market actors how tight the market could be in the future. And you need this to be aware of whether it makes sense to put certificates aside or not. This is the sort of virtuous cycle to the place where we are today, where we are today. However, this clearly can also be reversed. So there are risks to the future. For example, if there's a political or an economic crisis, this can go back. We have here the example of the energy crisis, where we had energy price increases and then at the same time, actors having lots of liquidity problems because they had to pay for 10 times as expensive gas. So they tried to sell anything they didn't need. So clearly certificates were one of the things that you can turn into money, putting pressure on the ETS price, which then lets the price collapse. And then if more and more politicians step in and say, well, we cannot afford to have this ETS around anymore because prices are going up so high, like the general gas prices are going up so high. So let's at least stop the ETS. This puts the future survival of the ETS in question and potentially leads to this downward cycle. We tried to test in our model what this would do. So what if actors become myopic again, and did a test run where we then after 2020 let the model revert to myopia. And as expected, we see a very strong decline in carbon prices to levels that clearly will not be sufficient to drive the short-term emission reductions and investments that we want to see to get us on track to climate neutrality in 2050. Now, going a bit beyond the paper, what could be done to prevent such a situation? Well, clearly, the best solution one would do is implement policies that work well. And work well, I mean here, produce similar results, no matter whether your actors that you're regulating are farsighted or myopic, because you don't want to be surprised by what your regulation does and everybody thinking something else will happen and then certain thing coming out. One example of this would be if you have a carbon price collar that limits the range of expected future prices. This could be very beneficial on both sides. So if you have a floor price and a price ceiling, it can really help to stabilize expectation about future scarcity and help people invest accordingly. Because if you don't have a ceiling, then many market actors might speculate, okay, if the price goes about 60, then policymakers will intervene and shut down the market, or if the price goes about 80. And if beforehand they say, okay, we expect this price to be between, I don't know, 40 and 120, then all the market actors have a better understanding how long likely the market will survive before policymakers feel they need to interact and to interfere with the market. Clearly, this is very difficult because there's the question of whether it would then be seen as a tax. I mean, there are different expert views on this, whether it really would then fall under the unanimity rule or not. But clearly, the Commission has been afraid to go there. So then, in this second best, more realistic, second best world, a more realistic approach is, on the one side, try to create common expectations. So discuss and voice your expectations about future prices and scarcities will be there. When the Fit for 55 package came out and the new linear reduction factor came out, I never read anywhere that the last certificates will be handed out around 2039. And that's a crucial information that you can calculate down with the linear reduction factor, but why not put this at the top of your communication and say, okay, we have this very limited total budget, be aware it runs out, think about the future, and also communicate what prices you expect. If you look in different documents from the Commission and the impact assessment from 2019, I think there are prices in the range of 40, 50, 60 euros. Other people putting out price around 300, like trying to organize a process of information gathering and discussion this already from the Commission side might have been very helpful to align expectations from different market actors. And then secondly, voice commitment to the policy. This is I mean, in a way it's obvious, but at the same time, it's not done that often. And I think it was really crucial that, for example, Franz Timmermann went out there and when the energy crisis was at its highest, and there were lots of calls that there should be interference with the market, he went out there and said it's a market mechanism, but if we want to achieve our goals, I think the price should be much higher than it is even at 50 euros. Clearly voicing, yes, it's going up and that's a good direction and we will not interfere with this. And it's something where we expect it to stay. And that helps a lot for market actors to well, have confidence that this policy instrument will still be around. So to summarize, I have one general insight that I hope to have explained to you a bit, namely that models that can shift between myopic and farsight and have both results in the same model version with the same technology, cost and price and so on assumptions can be really important and valuable for policy analysis and design, because they can show you where likely your policy will only work if people are farsighted or will work better if they're short-sighted or so on. So this gives you really important insights and lets you try to see how can we make it more robust against this uncertainty. And then concretely ETS related, according to our findings, our modeling, we think that before the 2018 ETS MSR reform firms were rather myopic. After the reform, firms became much more farsighted, and we have this way of explanation that we say the sizable political capital invested into the reform strengthened policy credibility and therefore allowed market actors to become more farsighted and take into account the future scarcities after 2030. From our modeling, we take that the around 80 euros per ton of CO2 that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years is well in line with the targets that we had in the Fit for 55 package and that are by now actually in a very similar way adopted by the EU, and that this price effect of policy credibility is really substantial. So whether market actors are short-sighted or far-sighted can lead to a factor 3 between the ETS prices and thereby have a huge impact on the transformation. And so clearly policymakers should take precautions to sustain the high credibility of their policy instruments and consider suitable interventions, not meaning changing the market, but like trying to strengthen commitment and voicing their commitment to this policy instrument if prices drop again to levels that signal low credibility. And if possible, design policies in general to be more robust against myopia. So in this ETS example, if in any way possible, put in carbon price collars. Sorry, this was still in there. Thanks a lot for your attention. And we have a paper and a policy brief that apparently I put in the wrong font again. So I'll put them, when we make this available on the CMCC channel, we'll put in the links to the paper and the policy brief. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Robert. Really interesting talk, and yeah, indeed, we will update the references to the paper and policy brief also for interested people to listen to it. Yeah, thanks a lot. I think very concise overview over and not easy topic, so that's great. Yeah, so please, if anyone connected online have questions, please or use the Q&A chat or raise your hand and I will give you the word in a minute. We start by a question in the chat on from Alice Di Bella. She's asking about how the implementation of the different policies has been done in the model. So are there differences across sectors, for instance, sectors covered by the ETS or not by the covered ETS, or they were like everyone was having this change that you explained in their optimization routine?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a good question, and I have to admit we didn't do a deep dive into this question. So clearly we have the numbers for the electricity sector and we have the number for industry, but I don't know if there were distinct characteristics between the two. There will be some differences because, as I said before, the industry sector is not as detailed in the model. We have it through marginal abatement cost curves that have less of the inertia that the power sector has. Yeah, so I have to admit we cannot really well answer to this question, because before we do that, we would have both sectors to be in comparable detail to really speak to this question.
Okay, thanks. A related point also on the implementation is from Javier Gonzalez about the discount rate used in the model optimization. So yeah, what discount rate is used in the model in general, and then so I mean, yeah, does it have an impact or interact somehow with the different optimization horizon?
Yes. So the discount rate, Joanna, correct me, 5% if I remember correctly in the default setting. And clearly we have been doing scenarios with different discount rates, because sometimes we get the reaction, well, but myopia can be easily represented just using the discount rate. And I would say this is partially true. Clearly, discount rate means market actors don't care so much about the future. But what we here is specifically wanted to look at is the credibility of a policy instrument on top of the market. So even if market actors would be rather forward-looking for when their investment pays off. So if they like with a 5% discount rate, they still care about their paybacks in 15 and 20 years, but still might not believe that ETS is around. So we couldn't use the discount rate here for this analysis, but rather needed to split it apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's quite clear. Before I give the word to Thibaut Briere, who wants to ask a question. Last one in the chat by Hauke for now, who's also wondering about this model implementation. So what exactly is myopia? So is there some, let's say, foresight about the future that is somehow assumed, or you're just solving the years your horizon is set in these myopic runs? Maybe Johanna, you have the best insight.
I can take this one. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. So basically in the myopic version, yes, we just optimize over these time steps. So there is no foresight at all. The model does not consider anything about the future regarding the ETS, or for example, future prices or technology learning. However, to have still, let's say, realistic investments, we add to the objective function or to our cost calculations a so-called book value or salvage value of technologies. So to ensure that the model still sees the remaining value of the generation capacities or storage or transmission lines that are still in the model. And we believe that this way, so is maybe this approach comes closest to what we believe maybe firms are doing when they are doing their like balance sheet calculations. So they might neglect, for example, they might not consider future policies, but they will still consider the future value of the assets that they hold. So this is the way we deal with it.
Okay, great, thanks. Very interesting, I think. Yeah, otherwise you might have like an infinite number of terminal condition issues. Otherwise, so it makes sense to have this somehow.
Yeah,
considered.
exactly. Otherwise, the model would not invest properly and always in the last time step, or would not invest at all. Yes, so this is very important.
Great, thanks a lot, Johanna. Okay, Thibaut Briera, I hope you can hear me. You can ask also your
yes,
question
can you hear me?
online. Yes, thanks a lot.
Well, first of all, congratulations for presentation and for the paper. It's really a nice piece of paper, really on a hot topic and really nicely written. I have a question on the salvage value. From what I understand, when you turn your model from perfect foresight to myopic foresight, all the expectations that go beyond the investment horizon are encapsulated in the salvage value, the value of the remaining capital. So how do you define this salvage value, and how do you make sure that the salvage value is lower in the myopic case, lower to recognize the fact that there are the prices are not well expected in the myopic version?
Yeah, I can take this one as well. So regarding the salvage value, basically it's the value. It's really the part of the investment costs of all the technologies that of the remaining lifetime of the technologies. So in a certain sense, the share of the remaining lifetime over the entire lifetime multiplied with the investment costs, just in a bit more complicated way because we have a nonlinear depreciation, but it's this is how we define the salvage value. And what's maybe interesting to know is that in the end, our myopic model and our perfect foresight model, assuming that our future, if everything would remain constant in the future, if like all prices, all energy demand, just everything, and for example, there would be no policies at all or like a constant CO2 price, then the myopic model and the perfect foresight, so the myopic model with the salvage value correctly implemented and the perfect foresight model will lead to the exact same investment decisions. And the difference between those two models only occurs as soon as we have something about the future that we cannot anticipate. So when the future changes and there is, for example, a decreasing ETS cap or changing prices of technologies. So this is how, so in the end, the myopic model reflects a worldview when you would assume that the future just remains exactly like as the world looks today. This is the implicit assumption.
Very clear, thanks.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think that's a good description of the market. Also a bit at the moment, maybe. Please feel free to continue to write questions in the chat or raise your hand. In the meantime, I would like to ask two questions I'm really curious about to hear your comments on. If I may, I will use my moderator power here. One is more a question, and that is, do you have in the model somehow future prices or forward contracts in ETS, and would that in some way change the results between the two runs? And then the second question I have is more like whether you can say anything based on Limes about the cost, right? The distribution of costs, let's say comparison of abatement costs over time or some kind of discounted values, because they must be different. Even if you have marginal abatement cost curves, there must be differences in the different non-optimal intertemporal allocation, right? Maybe I missed it somewhere in the paper or presentation, but yeah, it would be interesting to see these huge potential economic losses that an ill-designed market, including the behavior of firms, can lead to, which I think is really something important to think about. Maybe also for future research. I don't know if you can say anything about it. Thanks.
Johanna, do you want to take this or?
I will leave this one for you.
Okay. Yes. So on the second one, I don't know. I fully agree this would be really relevant. It was not in the center of our analysis, and probably we looked at it some point of time, but it didn't find its way into the paper. I have to look it up, and as you say, for future analysis, next time we do a comparison between perfect foresight and myopic, this will clearly be part of it, and it's very relevant. It just never made it into the values. And then the other thing is that's really a very good point about the futures market. So in our model, we don't have a future market that would represent in the myopic case that the certificates still have a price in the future. This is in a way a weakness. On the other side, I'm wondering, this is 10 years into the future. So how much, like, is there, I would doubt that there is a liquid futures market for going further than 10 years, where you would actually be able to now make a contract and get that money and really take into account. So what we have is representing the market shuts down after our foresight period, or breaks down, and then whatever future, yes, if you had a real world future, it would help you, but if you don't have that, and I think it's impossible to get a 10-year future on your ETS certificate. So I would say it would be interesting to see the effect, but then you would have to guess why is that, like, what is the price afterwards? You can't take it out of the model, because that's exactly what we're doing, not taking the perfect foresight where everybody believes everything goes towards this climate neutrality. And actually, that's something we had last year or 2 years ago, a workshop in Brussels with many different analysts, carbon market analysts and carbon market modelers, where we saw that in many of their results, the bank, so the TNEC, the storage certificates is very low in 2030. And we were saying, yes, but there's this strong scarcity. And if people are forward looking, they will have to put this aside. And many of the others, just a very ad hoc rule saying, okay, X% of today's emissions are kept aside, which can also be informed by market heuristics of how much do you hedge. But still, I would say it doesn't include the the knowledge that the future will be much scarcer. And so I'm a bit skeptical that that is sufficient to represent this. And it has a huge impact on prices. I mean, this is exactly what we show here. If you expect things to get difficult and still be there after 2030, you will put a lot aside, and this will raise prices a lot.
Yeah, no, I think this is the key point, and I agree for now the whole issues about the futures and other, especially over the long time. Yeah, it's very small and a lot of speculation is being studied, but yeah, I mean these are the big drivers. Yeah, for sure, the credibility in the policy and therefore, yeah, let's see where the carbon price is going to stand next year. Yeah, great, thanks a lot. Well, yeah, also congratulations from my side to the paper, and good to see it also as a policy brief out. Will sure make its way into the relevant people in Brussels and other places. And with that, yeah, well, thanks a lot everyone for attending, and the special thanks to Robert and also Johanna to present the paper and for your time. And yes, see you next time for another webinar, and yeah, wish everyone a nice rest of the day. Thanks again, Robert and Johanna, and see you soon.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation and giving us this opportunity, and see you at the next webinar.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Bye. Have a good day.